Jumbo, my community, and Aquaba. Welcome to the Espresso Talk Today show. This is where we brew up real talk on issues that matter to Black people. I'm your host, Amma Robin, and today we are diving back into that topic that's often whispered but rarely shouted, though I'm going to shout it now. Racial isolation. You remember I just discussed racial isolation that's experienced in schools, kindergarten to college and even beyond, and that was an intense show. It was so intense that you all asked for more, and I don't blame you. We covered a lot in that show, but there's still so much more, and we're going to get to a lot more of it today. I don't know if we'll get to it all, but we're going to get to a lot more. This one is for all of my people, age 2 to 92, who know what it's like to be the only Black face in a sea of white spaces. We're getting edgy, we're getting unapologetic, and we're getting real today because it is time to break that cycle. Yes, it is. Oh, we do have a lot to talk about. But before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're feeling this episode, please share it with your fam, your crew, your circle, and everyone in your community. Now, let's grab an espresso, close the door, and we're going to get started. So let's get started by talking about the racial elephant in the room, the experience of racial isolation. You know, that term, racial elephant in the room, was coined by educational psychologist Howard Stevenson in his book, Racial Literacy in Schools. But you know what? That elephant is everywhere, and you're going to see that this applies everywhere. Picture this. You're at the office, the only Black person in a room full of colleagues who are chatting together, laughing, and having a great time. You want to join them, but you're thinking about the latest police killing of a young Black man who could have been your son. Or you're still upset that the security guard asked to see your ID again while your white colleagues just breezed throughly on into the building. You want to talk about these injustices, but you feel that your colleagues just won't understand. And you don't want to hear their lame excuses again that, that wasn't about race, or that it's no big deal, or, you just have to let it go. Or maybe you're at a restaurant where the people glance at you once and then twice. And you never get used to that double look. I've gotten that a lot. And some of the looks feel kind of like daggers. You look around, but you don't see anyone who looks like you. You suddenly feel utterly alone and on display. Suddenly, you're representing all Black people, trying to look relaxed and calm. Also trying not to look edgy or angry or some other Black stereotype, but you're feeling alone and vulnerable and surveilled. You might also feel alone in that restaurant or in that office, but you're not alone. These experiences are more common than we'd like to admit. Many Black people feel the same way. And I'm putting my hand up because I know that I do and that I have. Remember the discussion about 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, who was the first Black student, she was a first grader, at an all-white school in New Orleans. She was surrounded by federal marshals to protect her from the angry crowd of white parents. One of the parents was actually holding a coffin with a Black doll in it. And these parents wanted to keep their school all white. They actually had a sign saying, "All I want for Christmas is an all-white school." This happened in 1960, not so long ago. But it continues to happen every day when Black people, especially solo Black people, enter white spaces. And Many of us are entering spaces alone. That was just an example. That was an example of racial isolation at school. And yes, even first graders can feel it and experience it. Here's a more recent example. One of my listeners, I'm going to call her Aisha, told me about her job. She's a talented software engineer. She is really hardworking too, but she often feels isolated in her predominantly white Silicon Valley office. Aisha says she has to work twice as hard, sometimes even more, to prove herself. And the microaggressions abound. Things she gets questions about her hair, or she gets jokes about hearing gunfire at night in her Oakland apartment where she lives and where she commutes from. And these microaggressions are just exhausting. What makes it worse? Worse? The isolation, the utter isolation. Aisha has nobody who understands what she's going through. She can't share her feelings with anyone at the office because she doesn't fully trust her colleagues. And she may not be wrong about that. They smile in her face. She goes to lunch with them, and they all talk together about their families, their homes, their vacations. But if she were to bring up the latest police killing of a black person, or the racist security guards at the office, or racism in the tech industry, she would hear crickets, silence, and her white colleagues would glance at each other and sigh. Aisha would be isolated. She would have awakened the racial elephant in the room, and Aisha would be on her own to deal with it. As I said, racial isolation can occur anywhere, anytime. I have a story. Yes, I have a story too. I know we all do, and I definitely want to hear yours as well. I really do. I mean that. But here's mine. I was recently on a flight from Brussels to Athens on TUI Airlines. That's TUI. And yeah, I'm going to say the name and spell it because I don't want to let them off the hook. I boarded the plane and I was sitting in business class, so I was in the first row. I boarded and sat down. Then I watched as other passengers boarded the plane. Some sat in business, others went to economy. I was the only black person sitting in business, in the business class section. I was surrounded by white Belgians, Germans, and Dutch people. And then what happened? The flight attendant came directly to me and spoke very loudly and demanded my boarding pass. She wanted to see my boarding pass. She used a really loud tone and a very aggressive tone, too. I was shocked. I was stunned. I was really taken aback. Fortunately, I had my boarding pass and I showed it to her. Usually I just put those things somewhere in my suitcase so I don't really even notice, but this time I happened to have it. She read it very closely, then said simply, "Okay," handed it back to me and left. I was sitting in the first row, and I'd seen other people come on, and no one else had been asked for their boarding pass. The other passengers were looking at me, as if to wonder whether I even had a right to sit there. That it was normal for her, the flight attendant, to question my presence in business class, and that I had to prove my right to be there, even though no one else did. Let me rephrase. None of the white people sitting near me had to prove their right to sit there. Suddenly, I felt very isolated and vulnerable. And in fact, I was isolated and vulnerable. To compound the feeling, I told some of my friends when I arrived in Athens, who were white, about what had happened on TUI Airlines. They looked confused and wondered why the flight attendant would treat me that way. When I said, "Look, it was racism. What else could it be?" they backed away. They just didn't get it. And they just looked like, well, she brought that up again. Now I also felt racial isolation among my white friends. Racial isolation is real. It is the racial elephant in the room. Most black people can see it and feel it. I'm going to say that most white people might be able to see it and feel it too, but they have the privilege of ignoring it. They don't have to deal with it. I think now is a good time for a break and to breathe for a minute. When things get intense, I like to breathe. I hope you do too. I'll see you in a minute.
Girl, to get a lot of dough, anything is possible. Turn me up in the headphones. Yeah. Grind to get a lot of dough and dirt through all the obstacles, cause anything is possible. Yeah. Oh man, I got a lot of goals. Stack that bread and vomit nose. Anything is possible. Yeah. Grind to get a lot of dough and dirt through all the obstacles, cause anything is possible. Oh man, I got a lot of goals.
Man, I just really love hearing that, about anything is possible. Actually, it's anything is possible. I just love it. Okay, you feeling better? Good, me too. Let's get back to it. Yes, yes, yes. Racial isolation is real. Being the only Black person in that white space is difficult. These experiences take a toll on our mental health, and I think it's time that we start talking about it. Instead of, I know we're told to forget about it, to brush it aside, that it's our imagination. Nope, nope, nope. Today, we're going to talk about it. Remember, during the recent pandemic and lockdown, many of us learned the effects of isolation. We were separated from our families, our friends, our colleagues, and our daily work and exercise and family routines. I would venture to say that everyone was affected by the prolonged isolation in some way. Many were very affected by it. Depression, anxiety, substance abuse, domestic and child abuse all surged. Suicide increased. It was very hard to experience and to witness. It's past now, but the effects remain. The thought of returning to lockdown isolation is terrifying. I could also say that nearly everyone has PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, on some level if they went through that isolation. Racial isolation is the same, and its effects are real and long-lasting too. Feeling isolated from your support group, community, and culture for a consistent and prolonged period is racial isolation. It's not just about feeling out of place. Yes, that's part of it, but it's deeper than that. It's the vulnerability that we feel and the hypervigilance that we feel. It's the constant stress, anxiety, and even depression that can follow us everywhere we go and appear at any time because of the isolation or even the threat of isolation that we constantly live with. This is a significant difference, though, from the pandemic lockdown. Racial isolation never stops. It doesn't stop. It doesn't go away. It just never ends. As long as we're living Black in mostly white spaces, the isolation can continue. There's a name for this effect, and it is called racial battle fatigue. Have you heard of that term? I hope so, because we've discussed it before. But anyway, it's racial battle fatigue, and it's a term coined by Dr. William A. Smith at the University of Utah. Dr. Smith has been a guest on the Espresso Talk Today show several times, and he really brought out what it means to be Black and to feel Black in a predominantly white society or white space. In fact, he showed what racism and white supremacist beliefs can do to Black health. I have felt this, but I certainly didn't understand it. Dr. Smith, though, gave a name to that feeling, racial battle fatigue, and then everything began to make sense and fall into place. What is racial battle fatigue? It is a repetitive stress injury that damages Black mental and physical health. But a repetitive stress injury, really? What are the repetitive stress events? Great, glad you asked. They are the daily struggles of dealing with stereotypes, bias, microaggressions, systemic and interpersonal racism, and the fear that you'll be singled out because of your skin color or because of white racist beliefs. The constant threat of these struggles is also a repetitive stress injury. That's even the threat of it is an injury because we respond to it. We're constantly being injured by racism. The wounds can never heal because they're constantly being attacked. We're constantly being re-injured. Dr. Smith used the term re-traumatized. So the wounds cannot heal as long as the re-traumatization continues. And by the way, this is why we don't have PTSD, why it's not called PTSD, because the injuries are current and constant. They're not past injuries. Just so you know, this is not to diminish the devastating impact of past injuries, as in PTSD. It's just different. We are walking around with unhealed, opened, and unacknowledged wounds. Espresso Talk today is going to do an entire show on racial battle fatigue. It needs and deserves that special attention, so I won't delve too deeply into this now, but I do have a few things to say about it. But before we do, let's take another breather here. Then I want to ask you a few questions, and remember to take those deep breaths because it really does calm your nervous system. I'll see you in a minute.
Gonna get a lot of dough. Anything is possible. Turn me up in the headphones. Yeah. Grind to get a lot of dough and dirt through all the obstacles, cause anything is possible. Yeah. Oh man, I got a lot of goals. Stack that bread and vomit nose. Anything is possible. Yeah. Grind to get a lot of dough and dirt through all the obstacles, cause anything is possible. Oh man, I got a lot of goals.
Amma Robin returns. That's right, I'm back. I took a few deep breaths, and I hope you did too. Let's get back to it. I want to ask you a few questions. First, and really think about this. Do you often feel emotionally drained? Second, do you often feel headaches, muscle tension, or insomnia? Here's the third one and the last one. Do you have difficulty concentrating or focusing on your job or task? 3 questions. Well, these are common symptoms of racial battle fatigue. Many of the Black students in white schools that we discussed last week experience these same feelings and symptoms, and I can only imagine what 6-year-old Ruby Bridges experienced when attending the white school in Louisiana. But this does not only happen to Black students. Any Black person can experience these symptoms and feelings when they're in predominantly white spaces. Racial battle fatigue affects us all. Studies show that consistently experiencing racial isolation can lead to higher rates of stress, anxiety, depression, insomnia, headaches, and suicide among Black people in predominantly white environments. We also feel hypervigilant and exhausted in those environments. It's not in our heads. No, it is not in our heads. It's in the data. Professor William Smith showed that very clearly, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to dive deeper into that data in another show, so stay tuned. And remember to subscribe so that you will be notified when the show is released. But we're not here just to talk about the problem. And I don't mean just, because talking about the problem is really, really, really important. And it's important to raise your awareness to the problem. I think everything begins with awareness. Because once you're aware of a problem, you can do something about it. When you lack the awareness, things just go on and you wonder what is happening. So now you have the awareness. So this was your wake-up call. Racial isolation is real. The effects of racial isolation are real. Racial battle fatigue is not in your head. It's in the data. Racial battle fatigue is real. Now let's talk about some solutions. I love talking about problems. I love talking about solutions. Let's get to it. So what can we do What can we do to break these chains of racial isolation? As I said, awareness is important. We just talked about that. But here is something revolutionary. I consider it revolutionary. Practice self-care. I hope that wasn't a disappointment. It's because it really shouldn't be, because practicing self-care is revolutionary. It's a revolutionary act. This is not some crazy thing that only white people do. It's something that all healthy and happy people need to do. Get your rest. That's a revolutionary act already. Black people never get to rest. We were not brought to America to rest. So we have been working. People call us lazy, but it's not true. We never get to rest. We work very hard. But here's my challenge to you. Allow yourself to rest every day. Do what you need to do to rest. And that can be sleep, yes, exercise, laughing, walking. These are all forms of rest, in fact. Or just take 5 minutes and close your eyes. My great-grandmother, my big mama, used to say that everyone whose eyes closed ain't sleeping. And she was really true. They might be just resting. So remember to rest. Close your eyes and rest. Remember to breathe. That is rest too. Just get the rest that you need in whatever way that you need it. So, what do you do for self-care? Maybe you're already a self-care fanatic. I hope so. So do that. Do it every day. And if you like, contact me. I'd love to know what you're doing, because it helps us all. It'll help me. It'll help us all. What are some other solutions? Well, let's focus on community building within predominantly white spaces. Seek out those who share your experiences and create support systems. I mentioned this in a previous show that in college, the Black Student Union, and in law school, the Black Student Association, was my lifeline. They really, really were. Great community support and resources. And I could just talk with people who got it. No explanations were needed. Also, when we have community, we're not as vulnerable to the white gaze or to other forms of white aggression. Don't feel that you gotta go solo, because you don't. There is a community for you. Next, we need to demand cultural competence training in workspaces and schools. I know we keep bringing that up with the DEI programs, many of which are being thrown out the window now, especially in places like Florida and Texas, but we got to keep bringing it up. White is not the standard. Eurocentrism is everywhere, but white is not the default. And it's high time everyone understands our rich history and contributions. But it is more than that too. Microaggressions and biased behavior should never, ever be tolerated. And the burden has to shift away from the Black people who are always needing to justify, from us, we always need to justify ourselves and our presence. Their burden should be placed on the perpetrator, the bad actor, the white person who behaved badly, the police officer, all of them. We got to start giving these people the benefit of the doubt. They know what they did. And they know how they did it. But they just sit back and let us have to explain ourselves away or show our boarding passes or our IDs or why this was racism and it couldn't possibly be anything else. No, it is time to demand that the burden shift to where the bad actor is. And this is why I created that hashtag, my hashtag, Believe Black People. Because we are not victims, but we're survivors, and we deserve to be believed and supported. Well, okay, moving it away from us now, I don't want to forget about allies. Yes, white folks, you can make a difference. I know lots of white people who want to help and who have taken a lot of risk to help Black people. I've known others who have stayed silent when they should have spoken up. And I've known a few who have just basically crossed over to the other side. If you want to help, then it is time to challenge the status quo. Use your privilege to make bold moves. Don't just keep wearing it like a blanket around you. Listen, really listen to us. Point out the problems that you see to other white people. Don't point it out to black people. We know it. Point it out to your white friends. Okay? And work to be a part of the solution. Look, everyone has blind spots. Recognize yours and take steps to fill those gaps in knowledge. Here's my last one. Let's create safe spaces for open conversations about race and isolation. The United States has a big problem, a huge problem, discussing race and racism. It just doesn't do it. Or it denies the problem, or it lies about the problem. It diminishes the problem. America does not want to point out the racial elephant in the room, which is actually a racist elephant in the room. Black people often see it, white people rarely do. Most of us don't know how to manage that racial elephant, but we have to. So let's break the silence and bridge the gaps. Learning, reading, talking are a big part of bridging the gap. And I see those are also things that are really under fire. And I don't even want to bring up Ron DeSantis, but I just have to, of course, because he is part of the people, some of the people who are trying to stop the learning and stop the engagement. And unfortunately, many school districts are removing books, banning diversity and inclusion training, and building walls against learning and equity rather than bridges to understanding. Creating safe spaces for discussion and, as Howard Stevenson discussed, developing racial literacy and understanding racial socialization have been met with resistance and even hostility. We can't take this important step for granted. Safe spaces for Black folks are under attack. Black books are under attack. Black history is under attack. And the attack is real and tangible. Let's take one last breather break here. Then we're going to wind it down, and I got some extra info that I think you'll want to know. I'll see you in a minute. I'm back. We've covered a lot today, and it is time to wrap it up. Remember, you're not alone in this struggle. We're in this together, and together we can break these chains of racial isolation. We can empower ourselves against racial battle fatigue. So here's a call to action for everyone listening today. Build those communities, demand change, practice self-care. Never stop speaking out. Allow yourself to rest. Spend time in your safe space. Share your own experiences and solutions. Let's keep this conversation going. Love and cherish yourself, just like the ancestors love and cherish and guide you. You aren't ever alone. The ancestors got your back, every day, all the time. In today's episode, I did mention several professors and several books, and I just want to wrap those up here for you. First, there was Racial Literacy in Schools, Differences That Make a Difference by Howard Stevenson, an educational psychologist who focuses on racial empowerment in schools. It's an amazing book with actionable activities like meditation, journaling, and my personal favorite, having a comeback line. I really do love that one. Dr. Stevenson is helping and empowering Black students every day. Asante Sana to him for his amazing work. Remember the book, Racial Literacy in Schools. Then there was Ruby Bridges, the little girl who integrated the all-white school in Louisiana, surrounded by federal marshals. She's all grown up now, and she's written 2 books. First is called Through My Eyes, and the second one, This Is Your Time. In these books, she discusses her experiences and memories being surrounded by these vicious white parents and protected by federal marshals as a first grader in an all-white school. They are great, great books. And I gotta say, Asante Sana to Ruby Bridges for her courage really her courage. And she is such a positive person. None of that made her jaded or anything like that. She stayed positive and focused and courageous. So Asante Sana to her. You can buy all of these books at the Espresso Talk Today bookstore. This bookstore also helps support independent bookstores. They're under attack, really. So let's support them too. The bookstore is on the Espresso Talk Today website at espressotalktoday.com. Finally, you can find my ebook, which is actually a gift to you. It's called Embrace Your Blackness, a revolutionary guide to living in an anti-Black world. It's on the Espresso Talk Today website, and this is an empowering and uplifting book that can help you to navigate racial isolation in white spaces. It's a free ebook. Yes, that's right. It's my gift to you for having the courage to show up today. When we empower ourselves, we also empower each other, and we empower the whole community. That is a wrap for today's episode, y'all. Asante Sana for writing with me. Subscribe, please. Subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode. And remember, we're not just sipping coffee, but we are brewing change. And remember, my fellow warriors battling racial isolation, know this deep in your soul. You're not alone. Your experiences, your stories, your triumph, they all matter. If you want to keep discussing or just reading about these issues, then you should definitely subscribe. I really hope that you do too. Definitely subscribe to my weekly newsletter. It's a Black empowerment newsletter called The No Mo Beat. We discuss lots of issues there, so get your dose of Black empowerment every single week. Never a dull moment. Lots of growth moments, though. You can subscribe at the Espresso Talk Today website at espressotalktoday.com or on Instagram at Ama Robin L. That's Ama, A-M-A, _ Robin, R-O-B-I-N, _ the letter L. By the way, we hope that you'll join us on Instagram to discuss these issues, share your thoughts, and find an uplifting and safe space for you. That's my goal. So find us on Instagram at Ama Robin L. I'm Ama Robin for Espresso Talk Today. And remember, now more than ever, strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe, community.